Good morning, everybody. It's not often that I stand up here, so it's a little strange for me, and I'm sure it's just as strange for you. But this is not actually my first time giving a sermon. If you know Ken Burgo, his church in Litchfield has asked me to give sermons a couple times now on global missions. And I love global missions, and that's one of my favorite things to talk about. So, of course, I'm going to share some stories with you today. Global missions has shaped me into who I am today, and it's brought me so many new friends and experiences and changed the way I think about the world and how we live in it. I'm going to start off with a little background about myself because I know we have new members who have joined in the last couple of years, and so they don't really know me well yet. I grew up in northern Wisconsin as the next door neighbor of Jane and Ken Burgo. So I've known them since I was 4 years old. And Jane and Ken have been longtime members of faith and big supporters of me in my own life. I've been a lifelong Lutheran, and when I think about church as a child, the person who plays the largest role is my grandma Dorothy. She brought me to Sunday school, sat next to me during worship. I would sometimes sleep with my head on her lap during the sermons, and she was even my confirmation guide. And in the summertime, she would pack up my brother and my cousins and myself, and we'd all get into her car and sing Sunday school songs at the top of our lungs while flying down dirt roads. My grandma Dorothy was involved in every part of church life. She helped prepare the coffee on Sunday mornings. She cooked food for funerals, made pies for the church fair booth, helped out during worship, and was always someone that people could rely on. She taught me so much about taking care of and loving others even through hard times. Now, as much as I loved my grandma, I would still get homesick staying over at her house as a child, and they only lived 15 minutes away from my parents' house. So it was a big surprise to my family, including myself, that I went to college 4.5 hours away. At Luther College, now I told you, lifelong Lutheran, I studied history and Africana studies, and Luther was really crucial to transforming me and teaching me to let the experience I had change me for the better. The year I graduated was the 150th anniversary of Luther, and our guiding verse throughout the year was Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now, a couple weeks ago, one of my closest friends, Dione Stepanek, she came to faith and shared a sermon with us. We went to Luther together and were even co-presidents of one campaign chapter, if you know what that is. She called me one day right before my senior year and said, "Hey, do you want to go to Liberia with me?" And because of those experiences that I had had in college and even in high school, I said yes, and I probably wouldn't have said that, when I was 16 years old. I wasn't not ready to start traveling. And so we went to Liberia, West Africa. Dione's aunt, Carolyn Miller, was a missionary there for 24 years. She worked as a nurse alongside Dr. Walter Gwenegali, who later became the Minister of Health and Social Welfare in Liberia. She left in 1989 when the Civil War began, and we worked at Phoebe Hospital in Liberia, the same hospital Carolyn and Dr. G were at. And I was given the great honor of meeting Dr. Gwenegali when we went to Liberia. He continued to work at Phoebe all throughout the Civil War, and he dedicated his life to keeping people safe. At Phoebe, we alternated between praying with patients, working in the pharmacy, and even producing IV fluids. We were definitely in over our heads and not exactly experienced to do those things, but the people wanted to teach us. And so we learned how important it is to meet people where they are at in life. We couldn't change anything about the poverty that they were living in, but we could listen to their stories and share a meal with them. Dione and I met a married couple who were missionaries with the ELCA. They were some of the first missionaries to go back to Liberia after the Civil War ended, at least for the ELCA. And their children happened to be visiting for the summer, who were also from Iowa. That's where Luther is. And their son, Reed, told me about a program in Japan that he was thinking of applying for. Now, he ended up joining the Navy, so he never did that. Fast forward a couple of years to 2013, I decided to apply for that same program that Reed told me about and was accepted. So I was shocked and excited and thrilled. I mean, you name every emotion, I was probably experiencing it. I had no real idea what to expect. So that brings us to our reading for today. Global missions in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America is about accompaniment. Jesus' walk to Emmaus teaches us of everything we need to know about accompaniment. On that first Easter afternoon, 2 men were walking from Jerusalem to Emmaus. A man began to walk with them and asked them what they were talking about. But they were surprised to hear that he had no idea what was going on in Jerusalem, and so they shared the news with him. And once they reached Emmaus and the man shared a meal with them in the breaking of the bread, they finally realized he was Jesus. From this story, the ELCA developed its theology of mission as a journey taken with many companions. This model shows us the unexpected and sometimes unrecognized Christ who walks with us, and as we break bread together, we move towards Christ's mission of reconciliation between us and God and between us and one another. So what does mission mean in the 21st century? Well, when I arrived in Japan in 2016, I didn't speak a word of Japanese, and I only knew one other person in the country who had traveled with me to Japan. The first 4 months, I learned about the history of the early Portuguese missionaries in Japan. I learned about the JELC, the Japan Evangelical Lutheran Church, which is the companion to the ELCA. I took language classes, explored Tokyo and the surrounding cities, and I attended a church in Dainan-Chofu in southern Tokyo. This gave me my first experience of Japan and helped me to form a small community to learn from. I attended worship there each week, had lunch with the women's group, and celebrated my first Christmas in Japan at Dainan-Chofu. One of the things I learned to appreciate the most is that no matter where you are in the world, Lutherans love their liturgy, so it's easy to follow along even when you don't understand everything being said. After 4 months of language classes and training, I began my work with the JELC, and I took over as an English teacher at the Hongo Student Center and Katarina Dormitory, both inside Tokyo. I taught children as young as 3 and adults as old as 85. My adult students were a mix of businessmen, housewives, students, retirees, and people who lived abroad and just wanted to keep up their English. So I was really lucky and blessed to meet such a wide variety of people from all different walks of life. The Student Center was run by Hongo Lutheran Church. Lutheran churches were some of the first organizations to offer English classes to students to help them learn. And Hongo Lutheran Church was formed because so many students, so many people were attending English classes at the Student Center. It's right next door to Tokyo University, and it's full of warm, caring people. Outside of the type of food they serve at meals and the songs they sing in Japanese, the mission of Hongo Lutheran Church is not very different from faith's. They pack meals for the homeless, help older members of the congregation fix their homes, they have youth activities, Christmas sing-alongs, and generally just provide a safe place for people to gather and build a community. It was at Hongo that I met Kikuko Oe. She was the organist and a member of the choir and one of my advanced students. She got to know me and treated me like her granddaughter. At New Year's, she even gave me a red envelope with money, just like she did for her grandchildren. At Hongo, I met Etsuko, the secretary of the Church and Student Center. She would bring me delicious food to try, all the seasonal vegetables and fruits. She prayed with me. She always asked about how my family was doing, and when I needed a hug, she was always there to give me one. And at Hongo, I met Nobuo Yasui. Yasui Sensei was the pastor of Hongo Lutheran Church at the time and the director of the Student Center. He taught me so much about working hard in all areas of my life. He was astounding. He was part of the PTA for his children's schools. He was a volunteer firefighter. He wrote newsletters. I mean, the man could do everything. And he especially taught me to be a service to others, and that the love we experience is a gift from God. After returning to the States in 2016, I received a phone call from Jane Burgo. She knew of a church in O'Fallon, Illinois that was in need of a youth director, and the rest is history. I have loved my time at Faith, but one of my favorite memories occurred last summer on the mission trip to the Wisconsin Dells, though at the time it felt like a little bit of a nightmare. While we were at our first service site, Hope House, it was a domestic violence and sexual abuse shelter. This was the first full day of our mission trip. I called the service site for our next day saying, hey, what time? I just want to confirm what time we're going to be there tomorrow. And they said, oh, I'm so sorry. We don't actually have any work for you to do. So for the next half hour, I was frantically calling local volunteer organizations, but as you can imagine, no one was able to accommodate us on such short notice. Then a staff member from Hope House told me about Pathways, so I gave them a call. The interim director of Pathways, a woman by the name of Jessica, answered my call and was excited to hear from me and instantly told us to come the next day, that they would have plenty of work for us to do. When we arrived that Tuesday morning, we were given a very warm welcome and an introduction to Pathways. They work to provide shelter and comprehensive case management to their residents, and they spend 90 days doing everything they can to help the residents find a job and permanent housing. And since they receive funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, their residents are really limited to those 90 days. They can't stay any longer, or Pathways would lose their funding. Jessica told us that only 30% of people who have become homeless are able to successfully find permanent housing. So they do their absolute best during the short time that they have, but their residents are usually at the bottom of any list for jobs or for housing. And then if they are not able to find anything in those 90 days, they have to wait another year before they can apply for residency at the shelter. One of the things we appreciated most from the start of working with this organization is that the staff worked alongside us as we painted the hallways and the bathrooms in their building, as we weeded the flower beds out front and power washed their building and playground equipment. This gave us a great opportunity to hear why the staff do this work, the joys and struggles that they experience every day, and why it is so important to them that we showed up on July 11th, 2023 of all days. Jessica shared a story about their previous director. This person had been the powerhouse behind all of the projects that went on at Pathways, and in 2022, on July 11th, their director unexpectedly passed away. And since then, they had trouble getting any projects started or finished. Our group showing up exactly 1 year later brought them so much hope, joy, and inspiration. I went in that day so thankful because we were able to find work that would be meaningful for the kids, and just left blessed knowing that knowing how thankful everyone at Pathway was for not only the work that we did, but just showing them how much others cared about them with our mere presence. When I think of what mission means in the 21st century, I think of mutuality, inclusivity, vulnerability, empowerment, and sustainability. When we walk on this journey, we need to talk honestly with each other. We have to cross borders and undo boundaries that make us strangers to one another. And it takes time and lots of commitment to overcome them. The way that I've experienced this is through storytelling and relationship building. Simply spending time with others and hearing their story, and in turn, sharing who I am with them, from Dr. Gwenagali to Yasui Sensei and Jessica. The biggest thing I've learned in global missions is that before you can get to the hard stuff with someone, you need to have a relationship with them first. It is so important to meet others where they are at and to listen and respect what they have to say and what they have experienced. When you can build relationships with someone, whether they are Japanese or a young child in your congregation, you have to first build trust before you can share Christ. It is through sharing experiences together that you can experience the living Christ. Just as those two men did on the walk to Emmaus, just as our mission trip group did last summer in Wisconsin Dells, and just as our mission trip group to Uganda will do in July. We'll be leaving in 19 days. And so I ask that you pray for Stephanie and Teddy and Eunice and Tim and myself, that we can accompany the people we meet with open arms and open hearts.